All right, now I do see we have a few questions piling into the portal. I'll start. Let's see. We said that in your experience, were organizations able to prevent exfiltration using software? So no, they were not able to prevent that data exfiltration. They were only able to catch it early and then mitigate that. All right. Also have do you have visibility into the directory structures that were exfiltrated? And as in, you know, is it a one-to-one clone of how the data was stored in the MOVEIt, or is it lumped together in bulk single archive? So what we saw was when the threat actors used this second method, a lot of times that they would actually take that data, compress it on the MOVEIt server, and then send it out. For the data exfiltration, the open session, really it was a fire and forget. They literally pointed at the directories and said, go, and just let the MOVEIt server itself handle that data exfiltration. And so it really became a one-to-one broadly across that 95 percentile. We just saw it was a one-to-one replication from the MOVEIt server up to CLOPS cloud storage. Okay. Looks like we have another question is, was the data on the MOVEIt server typically to be transferred or already transferred? Is one less than the data already transferred, already received, removed from the MOVEIt server? Absolutely, that's one of the key takeaways here, is that data that has been transmitted or transferred, or that is up for a duration of time that is needed, be removed from the data server, and that proper data pruning is something that can reduce that risk later on. When we were doing these investigations and when we are looking at that database, we could see which data had been transferred. We didn't necessarily do the analysis to understand which data had been transferred, which data was up there. Really, the goal was to identify the data at risk. So I can't really tell you, whether or not someone had been transferred. I can say that some of the data that we saw on the servers did go back for quite some time and probably would have expired out of a portal if there was some policies in place. Okay. How could EDR prevent this? So I want to be really clear, EDR, endpoint detection and response, is not going to prevent this attack. This is a 0-day where they are leveraging the infrastructure in place to execute an attack. However, EDR is very good at catching and identifying that activity early. And the people that we saw that had EDR and NVR in place were able to identify that suspicious activity, and then were able to cut off that transfer and cut off that activity. One of the activities that we saw them catch was the web shell. When a web shell drops and is called, that web shell is actually compiled into a binary DLL on that server, and that is actually executed from there. So a lot of the EDR tools were able to catch the execution of that DLL as an executable, understand, hey, this is not normal, for a team to respond and look into it and say, this is not part, this human2.aspx is not part of the application, has a recent creation date, terminate that session. But again, that's not a prevention, that does take some time. The other thing we saw is people that had user behavior monitors in place were able to identify, hey, we have this one account that is now starting to transfer a lot more data than they should be transferring. Look into that session, identify it as odd, remove it from, remove that server from transferring the data. And so they were able to catch it early, but I'm really clear, in none of these cases was someone able to prevent the activity or prevent the transfer of that data before it occurred. Okay. Would encryption at rest and using a private key to decrypt minimize the impact? So MOVEIt is actually an application that is used and is approved for government use. It uses encrypted data at rest. So the files that are on the MOVEIt server placed there, they're encrypted, and there is a key, a private key that is stored in the MOVEIt database that is used to decrypt that data. So what happens to the MOVEIt server when there is a session and someone logs in and says, transfer me this file, the file is then taken the MOVEIt application decrypts that file and sends the user the decrypted file. Okay, so the MOVEIt takes care of that. So what the threat actors had to do is they actually had to know the API calls to be able to do that manually. But what they found was by letting the MOVEIt application do all that decryption for them, they could actually get that data out quicker. Now, if there was some other layer of encryption, absolutely. So if you took a file, wrapped it in your private key, stored it on the MOVEIt server where it was encrypted with the MOVEIt server's key, transfer that data, yes, the client would get it in the encrypted state. However, you would have to transfer the key to the client to be able to decrypt that data. And that's really above and beyond what you would consider normal or expected. Would it be, when we get in these engagements, when we find these servers, there's always a tug of war between convenience and security. The most secure computer is one that's not connected to the internet. It's absolutely secure. It's going to prevent any type of unauthorized access to the computer, have it not access the internet. And I know that Stuxnet and people can say that's not as secure as well. Yes, but it is more secure than a computer connected to the internet. It's just not very convenient or helpful to use. And so in the MOVEIt servers, it does have encryption at rest, and it does have a way to decrypt that in a way that if someone gained access to the MOVEIt server and stole the files, they would be encrypted. But in this case, they were actually leveraging the proper calls to decrypt those on the fly. And so that's why that data left in the decrypted state. Okay. Looks like we have another question that says, how did MDR play a role in the customers that had it versus the customers that did not? So the customers that had EDR, MDR in place were able to identify and react quicker than the teams that did not. All right. So remember this actually happened over a weekend, Memorial Day weekend to be specific. So you have a lot of teams that are disengaged, a lot of teams that are spending time with family, a lot of teams that have a skeleton crew, minimal crew on, right? Even though the team is away, the employees that had MDR in place and a 24-hour monitoring SOC that would respond to alerts were the ones that they were able to identify it, react, be able to quarantine that server, isolate that server, take that server down, however they chose to respond. But the MDR and EDR tools were the ones that were generating those alerts, and of course any type of end user behavior analysis type program. When that SOC was able to alert it, they were able to say, hey, we're going to isolate that and take care of that early. And so even though clock got all the way through to mission execution and started exfiltrating data, they saw a lot less data leave their environment than the teams that didn't have MDR, EDR in place, and simply CLOP was able to sit there and exfiltrate data from Saturday, Sunday, Monday, all the way, and then Tuesday people come in and find out, hey, there's an email from Progress, we're something bad, right? All right, and how did you see evidence of target enumeration between July 21st and July 23rd? Okay, so MOVEIt application actually has two components. You have a back-end database component, and you actually have a front-end web server. So those are the two pieces that we were able to pull. So when we actually do MOVEIt analysis, we would actually grab the server, or actually grab a backup of the database, and then grab the actual front-end web server. When we get that web server, that's going to have IIS logs. Traditionally, they were Windows servers. The bulk of the MOVEIt servers we saw were Windows. That's going to have IIS logs, Internet Information Service. There's web logs. Some of those servers that we had, and of course, you're talking about 50 plus MOVEIt investigations here. I can't even tell you how many servers we saw. Each investigation was between 1 and I think 13 servers was our largest one. We're getting a lot of visibility, historical visibility from those IIS logs. And what we were able to see is back in 2021, we saw a lot of failed requests to different ASPX files. So not guest access.aspx, meaning they're looking for the ones they can look, and we see them, you know, trying to get in a lot of different types of ASPX files, a lot of JavaScript files. They're calling them a lot of different ways, all the normal ways that we see threat actors doing this, except the source IP addresses. Looking backwards, we were able to see that those IP addresses were connected with CLOP. So we know this was actually CLOP. This wasn't actually someone at the time, even though at the time, it just looks like the normal internet scanning that you see broadly. Whenever you attach something to the internet and has an open interface, it's gonna get some type of scanning, probing type of activity. Looking backwards, we could identify those IP addresses as CLOP and realize that that was CLOP in 2021. By April 2022, what we saw was them actually calling guest access.aspx and passing in a very specific variables that were very consistent with it. The actual exploit is a chain of 6 calls that gets them what they want. What we saw was by April 2022, we saw them calling the first couple calls and then returning the organization ID. All right, and what the analogy that I use when I talk to attorneys and clients on calls is essentially by August 2022, if we think about bank robbers, or not bank robbers, but home burglars or in our houses, essentially in 2021, they were trying to figure out a key. By 2022, they had a key to all the locks. And they would simply walk up to a door, twist the doorknob, realize it worked, let the doorknob go and walk away, knowing that they could come back and enter through the door when they want. And from April 2022 all the way up until the MOVEIt attack, really up into a week or two before the attack, we see them using the same technique. Go in, turn the doorknob, realize it works, back out, likely testing and developing their automation scripts for making it all work. And then really on the 27th was when we saw them go in, open the doorknob, walk in, and then leverage that access across the board. And that's really when we saw them then using it broadly. Okay. Are you seeing similar TTPs used in attacking companies using Progress's WSFTP? Not sure about that question. George, do you have any information on similar TTPs from MOVEIt and then Progress Software's WSFTP?
Yeah, I think that the two vulnerabilities are slightly different, right? So sure, it's made by the same people. It performs similar functions. I've only worked one WSFTP case, and it's yeah, apples and oranges. I'm afraid in that particular instance, I don't think the cases that I've worked I would attribute to CLOP, if that's what you're asking.
Great, good deal. Looks like we have another question for George. So what is the highest ransom demand that we've seen across the MOVEIt engagements?
Yeah, so I think we've seen demands in excess of 200 million. Whether they were paid or not, can't really comment, but yeah, 200 million. 20 million. My apologies, 20 million.
Gotcha. Appreciate it there.